I'm going to start specifically with the situation in Hong Kong and then broaden out into the wider range of issues. And I start by saying that the dismantling of Hong Kong's freedoms, autonomy, and the rule of law, the conversion, if you like, of what was once one of Asia's most open cities into a closed, repressive territory, in flagrant breach of an international treaty, the Sino-British Joint Declaration, is or should be for the free world a wake-up call, a glimpse into the real character of the Chinese Communist Party regime, a regime that, as we've already heard in the first panel, has over the last, has always been repressive, but over the last decade has become increasingly and more intensely repressive, and one whose word cannot be trusted. In the past 6 months since the imposition of the draconian national security law in Hong Kong, we have seen that whatever remained of Hong Kong's freedoms have effectively disappeared. To paraphrase the famous words of Martin Niemöller in Nazi Germany, first they came for the protesters, but then they came for the legislators, and now the Legislative Council has no pro-democracy members in it and is a total puppet of Beijing. Then they've been coming for the media with the particular targeting of Jimmy Lai and academia and schooling, and already the judiciary, religious freedom and civil society are targeted in Hong Kong, a place where all these things were almost taken for granted until recently. Every week in Hong Kong, activists have been arrested. On the 6th of January, 53 pro-democracy former legislators, candidates, activists were arrested in one go for the simple crime, in inverted commas, of having conducted a primary election to choose their candidates last summer. And yet again today, 11 arrests have been made in Hong Kong. Why does all this matter? Well, firstly, if we allow the destruction of a free city to take place with impunity, then it is not only a threat to the people of Hong Kong, it is a threat to freedom itself. And we can be sure that the regime will not stop with Hong Kong. Taiwan is already in its sights, and our own freedoms as well. But secondly, what is happening in Hong Kong is just a fraction of the atrocious human rights crackdown throughout China. Last night, as you've already mentioned, in London, the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission launched this very important new report, The Darkness Deepens, which details the Chinese Communist Party's violations across the board. The persecution of Uyghurs, which is increasingly recognized as a genocide, the persecution of Christians, which can be described as the worst that they've faced since the Cultural Revolution, intensifying repression in Tibet, the persecution of Falun Gong, forced organ harvesting, the development of the surveillance state, the crackdown on human rights defenders, civil society, bloggers, citizen journalists, whistleblowers, and any form of dissent. And the report, which I should say, although it's from the Conservative Party Human Rights Commission, it ought to be a report that should be of interest to people regardless of party politics. It's not a party political report, it's a human rights report. And it calls on, and this reinforces the points that have been made in the first panel, it calls on the democratic world to unite to stand up to the regime's increasing repression at home and aggression beyond its borders. It sets out a range of recommendations, which we could perhaps explore in the discussion, and it calls for a long overdue response to what it describes at the end of its concluding chapter, and with these words I conclude, it describes as, quote, the mendacity, brutality, inhumanity, insecurity, and criminality of the Chinese Communist Party regime. Thank you.